In the year 1917, in a small field in Fátima, Portugal, 3 young shepherd children received a series of visions that would change the world. They were given 3 secrets by an apparition of the Virgin Mary. The first was a terrifying, soul-searing vision of hell. The second was a prophecy of a second Great War and the destructive rise of Soviet communism. But it was the third secret that became one of the most guarded and feared documents of the 20th century. Written on a single sheet of paper by Lucia, the last surviving child, it was sealed in an envelope and sent to the Vatican with strict instructions from heaven itself. It was not to be opened until 1960. But when the year 1960 arrived, the world waited, and the Vatican said nothing. Pope John XXIII reportedly read the secret, turned pale, and locked it away again, choosing silence over revelation. For decades, speculation ran rampant. Did it predict nuclear annihilation? A great apostasy that would crumble the Church from within? What could possibly be so terrifying that multiple popes would read it and then actively hide it from the faithful? In the year 2000, the Vatican finally released the secret, but to this day, many insiders, theologians, and investigators believe the official version is incomplete, a sanitized summary designed to placate the public. They believe the truly horrifying part of the prophecy remains locked away in the papal archives. So, what was really in the third secret of Fátima? And what part of it was so dangerous that the Vatican might still be hiding it today? Our story begins not in the gilded halls of the Vatican, but in a humble, sun-scorched field in central Portugal. The year is 1917. The Great War, the war to end all wars, is tearing Europe apart, and thousands of Portuguese soldiers are dying on the Western Front. At home, the nation is in turmoil, ruled by an aggressively anti-clerical government that has suppressed religious orders and seized church property. It is a time of deep anxiety, poverty, and a desperate, clinging faith. In the small village of Fátima, life continues as it has for centuries, dictated by the seasons and the rhythms of the Catholic calendar. It is here we meet our 3 protagonists, not kings or popes, but simple, illiterate shepherd children. There is Lucia dos Santos, a serious and responsible 10-year-old, and her 2 younger cousins, the quiet and gentle Francisco Marto, aged 9, and his sensitive and spirited sister, Jacinta, who was only 7. Their world was the Cova da Iria, a large pasture where they tended their family's sheep. Their days were spent in prayer, games, and the quiet solitude of the countryside. But on the 13th of May, their ordinary lives were shattered forever. As they were playing, a brilliant flash of light cut through the clear sky, followed by another. Fearing a storm, they began to gather their flock, but then they saw it. Standing atop a small home oak tree was a figure, a lady of indescribable beauty, more brilliant than the sun. According to Lucia's own memoirs, the lady was robed in white, edged with gold, and held a rosary of white pearls. Her face was serene, yet tinged with a profound sadness. She spoke to the children, her voice gentle, telling them not to be afraid. She asked them to return to that same spot on the 13th day of each of the next 6 months. In return, she promised to reveal who she was and what she wanted, and she left them with a question that would frame their entire ordeal. Are you willing to offer yourselves to God and bear all the sufferings He wills to send you as an act of reparation for the sins by which He is offended, and of supplication for the conversion of sinners? The children, in their innocent piety, agreed. When they returned to the village and told their story, they were met not with belief but with scorn and suspicion. Lucia's mother, convinced her daughter was lying, subjected her to relentless questioning and even physical punishment. The local authorities, deeply suspicious of any public religious display, saw the event as a potential threat to the secular state. The parish priest was skeptical, warning them that it could be a demonic deception. The children were interrogated, threatened, and ridiculed. They were told they would be boiled in oil if they did not recount their story. Yet through it all, they refused to change a single word. Their quiet, unshakable conviction began to convince others. By the next apparition on June 13th, a small crowd of about 50 curious onlookers had gathered. By July 13th, the number had grown into the thousands. The children would kneel before the home oak, and while the crowd saw nothing and heard nothing, They would watch Lucia engage in a conversation with an unseen entity. They saw her face radiate, they heard her responses, and they felt a palpable sense of the sacred in the air. The lady taught the children new prayers and stressed the importance of praying the rosary every day for peace in the world and an end to the war. But it was during this July apparition, with thousands of people watching, that the lady entrusted the 3 children with 3 secrets, a secret in 3 distinct parts, a message of terrifying importance meant for the entire world. On July 13, 1917, the tone of the apparitions shifted dramatically. The beautiful lady, who had been a source of comfort and wonder, now revealed a truth so horrifying it would mark the children for the rest of their lives. This was the first secret of Fátima. As Lucia would later write, the lady opened her hands, and from them projected a ray of light that seemed to penetrate the very earth. Suddenly the ground disappeared, and the children found themselves looking into a terrifying vision of hell. Lucia described it as a great sea of fire. Plunged in that fire were demons and souls in human form, like transparent burning embers, all blackened or burnished bronze. They were floating about in the conflagration, now raised into the air by the flames that issued from within themselves, then falling back on every side like sparks in a huge fire, without weight or equilibrium. The vision was not silent. It was filled with shrieks and groans of pain and despair which horrified the children and made them tremble with fear. The demons were distinguishable by their terrifying and repellent likeness to frightful and unknown animals, all black and transparent. This vision, she said, lasted but a moment, but if it had gone on for a second longer, they would have died of terror. The lady then looked at them with a sad kindness and said, "You have seen hell, where the souls of poor sinners go. To save them, God wishes to establish in the world devotion to my Immaculate Heart." This was the first secret, a stark, medieval, and deeply personal vision of eternal damnation, shown to 3 small children to impress upon them the gravity of sin and the urgent need for prayer and penance. But the lady's message then expanded outwards, from the personal to the geopolitical. This was the second secret. She began with the promise the war would end soon. But she followed it with a dire warning. If people do not cease offending God, she said, a worse one will break out during the pontificate of Pope Pius XI. She foretold that this new, more terrible war would be heralded by a sign from heaven. "When you see a night illumined by an unknown light," she warned, "know that this is the great sign given you by God that He is about to punish the world for its crimes by means of war, famine, and persecutions of the Church and of the Holy Father." Many believe this prophecy was fulfilled on the night of January 25, 1938, when a spectacular aurora borealis, a truly unknown light for that latitude, filled the skies across Europe. It was so intense that fire departments were called out in London, believing the city was ablaze. Lucia, by then a nun in a convent, was certain this was the sign the lady had spoken of. Within months, Hitler would annex Austria, setting the stage for the Second World War, which began under the reign of Pope Pius XI, just as the prophecy had declared. But the second secret contained an even more specific and, at the time, more perplexing element. To prevent this future catastrophe, the lady made a specific request. She called for the consecration of Russia to her Immaculate Heart. If this were done, she promised, Russia would be converted and there would be peace. If not, she warned, Russia will spread its errors throughout the world, causing wars and persecutions of the Church. The good will be martyred, the Holy Father will have much to suffer, various nations will be annihilated. In 1917, with the Bolshevik Revolution still months away, this focus on Russia was astounding. The errors she spoke of would soon be understood as the state-possamid atheism of Soviet communism, a force that would define the rest of the 20th century. The second secret transformed the Fátima message from a village miracle into a divine commentary on the great ideological struggles to come, setting the stage for a final, third secret. A secret so terrible it would be locked away from the world for decades. Following the apparitions, the lives of the 3 shepherd children were irrevocably altered. They were no longer anonymous figures in a rural landscape. They were custodians of a divine secret. But their time together as a trio was tragically short. The great influenza pandemic that swept the globe after the war did not spare the village of Fátima. Francisco Marto succumbed to the illness in 1919, followed by his sister Jacinta in 1920. They died as they had lived, with a quiet, profound piety, offering their suffering for the conversion of sinners as the lady had asked. Their deaths left 10-year-old Lucia dos Santos as the sole living guardian of the third secret. The full weight of the unrevealed prophecy now rested on her shoulders alone. Years passed. Lucia, seeking a life of quiet contemplation, joined the Order of the Sisters of St. Dorothy. The world moved on, but the memory of Fátima and its unfinished message lingered. As the Second World War raged across Europe, fulfilling the dark prophecies of the Second Secret, church officials began to feel a new sense of urgency. What if Lucia, the only person on earth who knew the final part of the secret, were to die, taking it with her to the grave? In 1943, this fear nearly became a reality when Sister Lucia fell gravely ill with pleurisy. The Bishop of Leiria Fátima, José Alves Correa da Silva, realized he could wait no longer. He officially ordered Lucia to commit the third secret to writing. What should have been a simple act of transcription became a trial of profound spiritual and psychological agony for Lucia. For weeks she tried to obey the bishop's command but found herself mysteriously unable to do so. Whenever she sat down with pen and paper, a deep and inexplicable anguish would overcome her, making it impossible to write a single word. She was not being defiant. She described it as a supernatural struggle, a force preventing the secret from being revealed even to the bishop. This torment lasted until the 3rd of January 1944. On that day, she would later recount, she knelt in prayer in the convent chapel before the tabernacle, and she received another vision of the Virgin Mary, who touched her on the shoulder and gave her the strength and peace of mind she needed. The mysterious veil of anxiety lifted. Immediately after, Sister Lucia sat down and wrote out the secret on a single sheet of paper. She detailed the vision exactly as she had seen it 27 years earlier. She then placed the sheet inside a standard envelope and sealed it with hot wax. On the outside of the envelope, she wrote a crucial instruction. It was not to be opened until after the year 1960. If she were to die before then, the envelope was to be entrusted to the Cardinal Patriarch of Lisbon. She then handed the sealed message to the Bishop of Leiria, who promised to respect her wishes. For over a decade, this small, unassuming envelope, containing what was believed to be a message from heaven about the fate of the world, remained in a safe in Portugal. But the secret was too important to remain a local affair. The Vatican, and specifically the Holy Office, the very department tasked with defending Catholic doctrine, grew increasingly concerned about the document. They knew of the fulfilled prophecies of the second secret and understood the potential significance of the third. In 1957, the order came from Rome. The Apostolic Nuncio, the Pope's own ambassador to Portugal, was dispatched to retrieve the envelope. It was transferred under the highest security to the Vatican. There, it was not placed in the general archive, but in the most secure location imaginable, the secret archives of the Holy Office. Finally, on the 4th of April 1957, the envelope containing the third secret of Fátima was placed inside another, larger envelope and stored inside a safe in the papal apartments themselves, awaiting the arrival of the fateful year 1960. The year 1960 was not a random date. When Lucia had sealed the envelope, she explained that she had chosen that year because the Virgin Mary herself had indicated it. Lucia had reportedly asked the lady why the secret couldn't be revealed immediately. The response was that its meaning would become more clearly understood after 1960. This phrase, more clearly understood, became the lens through which the world anticipated the revelation. What was happening in the world at that time that would make a divine prophecy suddenly clear? The answer was obvious to almost everyone: the Cold War. By the late 1950s, the world was living under the constant, terrifying shadow of the mushroom cloud. The United States and the Soviet Union were locked in an escalating arms race, building arsenals capable of destroying human civilization many times over. School children practiced duck-and-cover drills, and families built fallout shelters in their backyards. The Cuban Missile Crisis, which would bring the world to the very brink of annihilation, was just around the corner. In this climate of existential dread, the idea of a heavenly message, a warning or a promise of hope to be unveiled in 1960, captivated the global imagination. The Catholic world, and indeed much of the non-Catholic world, held its breath. Newspapers ran speculative headlines, and theologians debated the potential contents. The Fátima message was about to collide with the nuclear age. The Pope at the time was John XXIII, a man beloved for his warmth and pastoral nature, who was seen as a reformer. He had surprised the world by calling for the Second Vatican Council to open the windows of the Church. Surely, many thought this open and modern Pope would not hesitate to reveal the secret. In August of 1959, in preparation for the coming year, Pope John XXIII requested that the envelope be brought to him at his summer residence at Castel Gandolfo. He was joined by his Portuguese translator and by Cardinal Alfredo Ottaviani, the powerful and conservative head of the Holy Office. The seals were broken. The Pope read the contents of the single sheet of paper. According to the accounts of those present, the pontiff's reaction was one of deep gravity. He read it, prayed, and then had it read again. He turned pale and was visibly disturbed by what he had learned. After a period of silent reflection, he made a decision that would shock the world and fuel a half-century of controversy. He would not reveal the secret. He ordered the envelope to be resealed and returned to the Holy Office archives, declaring that the secret was not for his pontificate. He is reported to have said that the message does not concern the years of my papacy, and that his predecessors had wisely chosen not to publish it out of diplomacy. The world waited through the first month of 1960 with no word. Then, on February 8th, the Vatican issued a terse, anonymous press release through a Portuguese news agency. It confirmed that the third secret would not, in fact, be revealed. The statement was dismissive, claiming that the Church does not wish to take on the responsibility of guaranteeing the veracity of the words that the three shepherd children said the Virgin Mary had addressed to them. This was a stunning reversal. It relegated the secret to the realm of private revelation, and implied it was not something the faithful needed to know. The silence from the Vatican was deafening. It created a vacuum of information that was immediately filled with fear, suspicion, and speculation. Why would the Pope defy what many believed was a direct instruction from heaven? What could possibly be written on that single sheet of paper that was so horrifying, so spiritually dangerous, that he chose to hide it from the world? The Vatican's silence did not end the story. It began the true mystery of the third secret. The Vatican's decision in 1960 to suppress the third secret did not quiet the faithful. It ignited a firestorm of speculation that would rage for 40 years. The official silence created a perfect vacuum, and human nature, which abhors a vacuum, rushed to fill it with its deepest and most profound anxieties. The secret became a mirror, reflecting the fears of a generation living on a knife's edge. For millions, the most obvious and terrifying interpretation was nuclear war. The second secret had explicitly warned that various nations will be annihilated. In the era before 1945, that phrase might have meant conquest or political dissolution, but in the atomic age, it had a chillingly literal meaning: complete and utter obliteration by fire from the sky. This theory gained immense traction. Believers saw the third secret as heaven's final, desperate warning against mankind's self-destructive path. They imagined a text that described mushroom clouds, radioactive fallout, and the horrors of a thermonuclear exchange between the great powers. The Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962 seemed like a near-miss fulfillment of this hidden prophecy, a moment when the world stared into the abyss that Fátima had allegedly foretold. The logic was compelling. What other secret could be so politically sensitive that the Pope would choose to hide it, rather than risk panicking the populace or antagonizing the Soviets by revealing a divine condemnation of their state? The fear was that the secret was not a metaphor, but a literal and terrifyingly accurate roadmap to Armageddon. But another, even more insidious theory began to circulate, one that was arguably more terrifying to devout Catholics than nuclear fire. This was the theory of a great apostasy. The word apostasy means a total abandonment of one's religious faith, and in this context, It meant a catastrophic loss of faith, beginning at the very top of the Catholic Church. Proponents of this view, often traditionalist Catholics wary of the sweeping changes brought by the Second Vatican Council in the mid-1960s, believed the third secret was not about a political or military enemy, but a spiritual one. They argued that the secret predicted a crisis of faith within the Church itself, a period where modernism, heresy, and a diabolical disorientation would infiltrate the clergy, the episcopate, and perhaps even the papacy. This theory explained the Vatican's silence in a way the nuclear war theory could not. While a pope might hesitate to release a prophecy of war, he would be profoundly, existentially unwilling to release a divine message stating that the institution he leads would crumble from within. It would be an admission of failure on a cosmic scale. It would sow doubt and confusion among the billion-strong faithful. Proponents pointed to the words of cardinals who had supposedly read the secret and made cryptic comments. Cardinal Charpi, the personal papal theologian to 5 popes, was famously quoted as saying, "In the third secret it is foretold, among other things, that the great apostasy in the Church will begin at the top." This quote, though its context is debated, became a cornerstone of the apostasy theory, painting a picture of a Vatican hiding a prophecy not about the end of the world, but about the end of the Church as they knew it. These two dominant theories, nuclear war and spiritual collapse, defined the landscape of speculation for decades, fueled by a dedicated movement of believers, sometimes called Fatimists, who tirelessly campaigned, wrote books, and held conferences demanding that the Vatican finally obey the wishes of heaven and reveal the full truth. For 4 decades, the third secret remained locked away, its legend growing with every passing year. Popes came and went, the Cold War ended, and the immediate threat of nuclear holocaust receded, yet the envelope remained sealed. The world entered a new millennium, and it seemed the secret might be buried forever. But the Pope at this time, John Paul II, had a uniquely profound and personal connection to the Fatima message. On May 13, 1981, the 64th anniversary of the very first apparition, he was shot in St. Peter's Square in a brazen assassination attempt. He nearly died. But he survived, and he was unshakably convinced that his survival was a miracle, a direct intervention by the Virgin Mary of Fatima. He famously said that one hand fired the bullet and another guided it, diverting it from his vital organs. A year later, he traveled to Fatima to give thanks and had the very bullet that struck him placed in the crown of the official statue of the Virgin. This deep personal devotion set the stage for the final act. Pope John Paul II felt indebted to Fatima, and he believed his pontificate was intrinsically linked to its message. In the spring of the year 2000, during a historic trip to Portugal for the beatification of the 2 younger seers, Jacinta and Francisco, the Vatican made a stunning announcement. The Pope had ordered the Secretary of State, Cardinal Angelo Sodano, to declare that the time had finally come. The third secret of Fatima would be revealed to the world. The 40-year wait was over. Global anticipation, which had lain dormant for a decade, surged back to life. On June 26, 2000, the Vatican held a major press conference. Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger, the future Pope Benedict XVI, and the powerful head of the Church Doctrinal Office presided. The world's media gathered as Archbishop Tarcisio Bertone stood up to read the 4 pages of Sister Lucia's original handwritten text. The text did not describe nuclear war. It did not explicitly mention a great apostasy. It described something far stranger, more symbolic, and deeply unsettling. It began with the first 2 parts of the secret, the vision of hell and the prophecy of war, and then transitioned into the third, unrevealed part. Lucia wrote of an angel with a flaming sword in his left hand. The sword gave out flames that looked as if they would set the world on fire, but they died out in contact with the splendor that the Virgin Mary radiated towards him from her right hand. The angel, pointing to the earth with his right hand, cried out in a loud voice, "Penance, penance." Then the core of the vision unfolded. The children saw, in an immense light that is God, something Lucia described as being like people in a mirror when they pass in front of it. They saw a bishop dressed in white. The children had the impression it was the Holy Father. they saw other bishops, priests, and religious men and women going up a steep mountain, at the top of which was a big cross of rough-hewn trunks. Before reaching it, the Holy Father passed through a big city, half in ruins and half trembling, with a halting step. Afflicted with pain and sorrow, he prayed for the souls of the corpses he met on his way. Having reached the top of the mountain, on his knees at the foot of the big cross, he was killed by a group of soldiers who fired bullets and arrows at him. And in the same way, there died one after another the other bishops, priests, religious men and women, and various lay people of different ranks and positions. Beneath the two arms of the cross, there were two angels, each with a crystal aspersorium in his hand, in which they gathered up the blood of the martyrs, and with it sprinkled the souls that were making their way to God. This was it. This strange, violent, and deeply allegorical vision was the secret the Vatican had guarded so closely for more than 40 years. With the strange and violent text of the third secret finally public, the world turned to the Vatican for an answer. What did it all mean? The task of explaining the vision fell to Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger, the man who would one day become Pope Benedict XVI. In a detailed theological commentary released alongside the secret, he laid out the Vatican's official and final interpretation. The document, he explained, was not a literal prediction of a specific future event like a movie trailer. Instead, it was a symbolic vision, a condensed representation of the immense suffering the Church had endured throughout the entire 20th century. The central figure, the bishop in white, who the children had the impression was the Holy Father, was definitively identified as Pope John Paul II. The steep, arduous mountain climb represented the difficult journey of the Church through a century marked by persecution. The big city half in ruins was a powerful symbol of human history in the 20th century, a landscape devastated by 2 world wars, by the Holocaust, and by the rise of brutal, atheistic totalitarian systems like Nazism and Soviet communism. The most crucial part of the interpretation was the violent climax. The vision of the Pope being killed by soldiers with bullets and arrows, followed by the martyrdom of countless others, was presented as a symbolic fulfillment in the assassination attempt on Pope John Paul II. This event took place on May 13, 1981, the anniversary of the first Fátima apparition. According to Cardinal Ratzinger, the Pope was symbolically killed, but survived because of a divine intervention, a motherly hand that guided the bullet's path. The prophecy, therefore, was not absolute. It showed a terrible potential future that was altered by prayer and penance. The blood of the martyrs collected by the angels was not just the Pope's, but the blood of an entire century of victims. It was the blood of the millions of Christians who died for their faith under oppressive regimes, the bishops, priests, and lay people who were executed, imprisoned in gulags, or persecuted for their beliefs. The vision, in this light, was a tribute to their suffering and a confirmation that their sacrifice was not in vain, but was a precious offering that helps sprinkle and give life to the souls making their way to God. The angel with the flaming sword, poised to set the world on fire, represented the threat of judgment and self-destruction, particularly the threat of nuclear war that hung over the world for so long. But the flames died out when they met the splendor of the Virgin Mary. This, the Vatican explained, was the core message of hope within the terrifying vision. It affirmed that the power of faith, devotion, and prayer, the penance cried by the angel, could hold back even the most catastrophic of futures. With this explanation, the Vatican's position was clear. The third secret referred to past events. Its prophecies had been fulfilled in the trials of the 20th century, and the case was now officially closed. For many, the Vatican's explanation in the year 2000 was a satisfying and spiritually uplifting conclusion to a long and painful mystery. But for a significant and vocal group of theologians, investigators, and devout followers of the Fátima message, the official release created more questions than answers. The official story simply did not add up. A powerful counter-narrative quickly emerged, one that claims the Vatican did not reveal the whole truth and that the most crucial part of the secret remains hidden. The first major point of contention is the interpretation itself. Critics argue that linking the vision to the 1981 assassination attempt is a stretch. The secret describes a pope being definitively killed by a group of soldiers, not wounded by a lone gunman. It describes him being shot with both bullets and arrows, a strange and specific detail. It also describes countless other bishops, priests, and lay people being martyred alongside him at that exact moment. None of this happened in St. Peter's Square. To these critics, the Vatican's explanation felt forced, an attempt to fit a past event into a prophecy that it didn't quite match, in order to close the book on a troublesome subject. This leads to the most explosive theory that the text of the vision is not the complete third secret. Proponents of this view argue that the secret is composed of two parts: the symbolic vision of the bishop in white, which the Vatican did release, and a second explanatory text containing the Virgin Mary's own words, which they believe the Vatican is still suppressing. This makes logical sense. The first secret was a vision of hell, followed by Mary's explanation. The second secret was a prophecy of war, followed by Mary's explanation and her request for the consecration of Russia. Why, they ask, would the third secret be a complex, symbolic vision with no accompanying explanation from the lady herself? Evidence for this missing text is compelling to many. They point to the testimony of numerous high-ranking church officials over the decades who made comments that seem to describe a different secret. Cardinal Ciappi's famous quote about a great apostasy beginning at the top has no connection to the released vision. Father Malachi Martin, a controversial but well-connected Vatican insider, insisted for years before his death that he had read the true secret and that it spoke of a spiritual catastrophe, a super state of corruption within the church itself, something far more disturbing than what was released. Furthermore, there are discrepancies about the physical document. The Vatican released 4 pages of Lucia's writing, but multiple accounts from those who had handled the original envelope, including Cardinal Ottaviani, described the secret as being written on a single sheet of paper. This has led to the belief that the true secret, the single sheet with Mary's own terrifying words, is still locked in the papal safe, and what the world received was a secondary symbolic vision meant to distract from the real message. The real message, they believe, is the one that Pope John XXIII read and turned pale, the one that no pope could dare to release, a prophecy not of an enemy outside the church, but of a final, terrible corruption from within. And so the mystery endures, caught between the official story of a prophecy fulfilled and the chilling possibility that the world is still waiting for the third secret of Fátima. So where does this leave us? More than 100 years after 3 children looked up at a hollow oak tree in a small Portuguese field, we are left with a story that has spiraled from a humble miracle into one of the most profound and contentious mysteries of the modern era. It is a story of simple faith, geopolitical prophecy, and institutional secrecy. At the heart of it all remains a single, fundamental conflict, a deep chasm that separates the official narrative from the persistent, unanswered questions. On one side of this profound divide stands the Vatican, with its formal theological explanation. In this view, the secret is a closed chapter of history. It is a symbolic vision of the great trials of the 20th century, a tribute to the martyrs who suffered under godless regimes, and a prophecy whose central drama was fulfilled in the survival of Pope John Paul II from an assassin's bullet. The message, according to Rome, is one of hope, that prayer, penance, and the intercession of the Virgin Mary can hold back the flames of humanity's worst impulses. For the Vatican, the story has reached its definitive and final conclusion. But on the other side stands a persistent and compelling belief that the story is far from over. This view is held by those who see glaring discrepancies between the prophecy as written and the events it supposedly describes. They point to a pope who was killed by soldiers, not one who was wounded by a lone gunman. They point to the strange detail of arrows and the mass martyrdom of others at the foot of the cross, events that have no parallel in the 1981 assassination attempt. They ask why multiple popes, men of deep faith, would show such profound fear and hesitation to release a secret if it only referred to past events. This counter-narrative is built on the belief that the most crucial piece of the puzzle is still missing. They argue that the vision of the bishop in white was accompanied by a direct, terrifying explanation from the Virgin Mary herself, written on a single sheet of paper that the Vatican has never released. This missing text, they contend, is the true secret. It is the secret that speaks not of outside enemies, but of a great apostasy, a spiritual cancer growing within the Church itself, a prophecy so damaging to the faith of millions and the authority of the institution that it had to be buried at all costs. Ultimately, the controversy transcends the specific contents of a sealed envelope. It has become a powerful symbol of the tension between faith and institution, between private revelation and public authority. It forces us to ask difficult questions. Is it possible for a divine warning to be so terrible that the very institution it was meant to guide would choose to conceal it? And what does it mean for the faithful if the ultimate source of truth is perceived to be hiding a truth of its own? In the end, we are left with two possible paths. Was the third secret of Fátima a heavenly message of hope, a prophecy of suffering that was ultimately overcome, its purpose fulfilled and its story now complete? Or is it a warning that is still unfolding, a ticking clock whose alarm has been silenced? A prophecy of internal collapse, so terrifying that the Vatican chose to offer a comforting story rather than reveal the devastating truth. The answer remains locked away, either in the fulfilled history of the 20th century or in the silent, guarded archives of the Holy See. The world asked for the secret, and it received a vision. But many believe the true secret was not in what the children saw, but in what the ladies said. And those words they fear, we have never been allowed to hear.